Hi guys, this morning I'm going to talk about how to add texture to your still life photographs, and we're going to focus on our high key photos today. So the first thing we need to do is open up Photoshop, and I'm just going to go to open, okay, and I'm going to find the photo that I'm going to use. And I've just got it in my photography folder in 10VA, and it's called High Key. So I'm going to open that. Now, this isn't my own image. I've taken this off the internet, but I thought it was a good example of a high key photo because it's mostly very monochromatic, lots of bright light tones, with the exception of this lovely sort of bowl of berries, which adds a bit of contrast. So it's quite an interesting photo with interesting textures, okay, to break up all that white monotony of white and sort of grays and creams. Okay, so what I'm going to do is add some grain to this particular photo, some grainy texture. Now, in the old days, artists could do this because they used film photography, and film has grain. It has grain. And depending on the type of film you used, sometimes the grain was really obvious and sometimes it was really fine and you couldn't see it. But today we use digital and there is no grain. And so artists or photographers often like to recreate this effect, and it can be done quite easily and quickly using Photoshop. So before I start, I just want to make sure that you have the following tabs open. So firstly, we need to go to Window up the top of your screen, and we need to make sure that History is checked and Layers are checked. Mine already checked because, oh, I just unchecked it. Mine were checked because I always use those. Another thing that I often lose are my toolbox, my tools, which are here. If you are missing yours, they're right down the bottom. Just click Tools, okay? You'll need those as well. Okay, now, history is basically how you delete mistakes. When we use a Word doc, we use Control-Z, and we can go Control-Z quite a few times, and we can go backwards in history. With Photoshop, you can only use Control-Z once, and then it won't work anymore. So what we need is a history palette, which is this one here, and it basically records all your steps, and you can go backwards and forwards in history to delete mistakes. Over here is the Layers palette, and this is where you add features to your photograph, okay? And we'll talk about that as we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new layer to my photo. Actually, I'm going to do a quick workflow on this first. This is a pretty good photograph because it's a professional one and it's already been edited, but you should always do a basic workflow. And I showed you how to do that earlier on. Just going to quickly do it now. It's Layer, New Adjustment Layer. We do the levels, which fixes the tones. So we've got some nice dark tones and some light tones. If I click on, these are my black tones here. If I click the option button, I can see there aren't any. Actually there are. I actually don't want too much because this is a high key photo after all. If I click on the white button and click option, there aren't any pure white. I might just move it over a bit, just a little bit. Okay. And these are all my mid-tones. So I can just play with that. So this is a way of just getting your photo, all the tones just right. And I'm going to just do the hue saturation as well, even though I probably won't change it. You may need to play with yours a bit. So Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Hue Saturation, and click OK. And we're not going to change the hue because that's just changing the colors. We don't want to do that, okay? We certainly don't want to change the lightness and darkness. We do that through level. So don't touch that button. You may want to play with the saturation. You may want to bump up the color, which I actually don't want to do. I don't want it to look more intense. So saturation basically means intensity. I don't like that. You may want to actually desaturate it and get rid of some of the excess color in your photo. As it turns out, I actually like it just as it was. So I'm going to leave that, but that's the hue saturation. So that's basically your workflow for every single photo that you take, okay? And of course you crop it, but I'm not going to crop this. Okay, I'm going to jump straight into my filters. This is where I want to add effects to this photo. So the first thing I'm going to do is in my layer palette, right down the bottom, I'm going to go to this little plus sign, which basically adds a blank layer. There is nothing on that layer at the moment. And what I'm going to do is fill it up with white. And on that white surface, I'm going to actually add grain or dots. So over here are my color swatches that I've got. If I double click it, it opens it up to all these colors. Now I just want white. So if you click in the top right-hand corner, you'll get pure white. You know, if I click down here, you get pure black. And then you've got, you know, all this array of colors that you can click on. But I just want white. So I'm going to click white. Okay. And now I'm going to fill that blank layer with white. So it's just simply edit, fill. And it's going to ask, what do you want me to fill it with? I've got my foreground color, which is that. I could fill it with my background color, which is this one here. I could fill it with another color. You know, I could, no, I don't want to do that. I could fill it with a pattern. I could fill it with black, 50% gray or white. Actually, I could have just clicked white. And then I click OK. Okay, so now I've got just a layer of white. Okay, now that lives on top of all of that. The reason why I can't see my background, which is my still life, is because it's covered by this layer. So I can blink it open and shut. Okay. And it's still there. It's above it. I'm going to add grain to that layer. I'm going to add some textures. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to filter, and I'm going to go to filter gallery. I'm going to add the texture to this white layer. It's gone onto film grain already because I've been playing with film grain, but you can get all sorts of, you know, it's not going to really do very much on a white layer. There's nothing there, but the film grain, it will add some grain to it. Now, this is basically what film grain looks like. So in the old days when people took photos using film, this is the grain that you could see on the photo. And it gives it a certain quality that people try to emulate or recreate with Photoshop. You can also change the grain. You can make it quite heavy and you can make it really fine. Okay, so just over here, I'm just going to leave it. I actually like it to be a bit visible. Okay, and you can play with the intensities as well. I'm just going to play with that. The highlight area, I'll just leave it. Actually, I'm going to make it, just put it there. Then I'm going to click OK. So now I've got this lovely grain. How do I blend it into this photo? At the moment, you'll see here it says normal, which means this is a normal situation where this is covering the photo. However, I can click on that and I can actually scroll through these and it blends that grainy surface that I just created with the photo underneath. So you can see, you know, you can get some really beautiful effects. This one doesn't do much. The first, I think, tab was the best. You can also, soft light is quite beautiful. You scroll through them and find one that you like. I think I like multiply. Okay. And I also like linear burn. Actually, I might leave it on linear burn. So now what I've done is I've blended, this is called a blend mode, by the way. I've blended this lovely grainy white with the background layer, which is a still life, and created quite a moody photo, which I think improves this particular image. If it's too much for you, you can even change the opacity of this layer so it doesn't affect it so much. So you can lessen the effect if you like. Okay, so I'm showing you this because there are lots of different textures that we can play with. And certainly next week, I'm going to introduce you to some more really sort of textured layers, and we'll play with that. We'll use those on our low key photos, which are really dark photos. So I'm going to save that one. So we'll save it. And I always like to get you guys to save things twice. I like you to save it as, I'm just going to call it edit one, as a Photoshop file, which means that it saves all these layers so that if you, for some reason, don't like it, you can go back and play with the hue saturation, you can play with the levels, you can change this as well. So by saving it as a Photoshop file, you're retaining all the layers. So we click save. I'm just going to call it edit one. Okay, and I'm going to save it again. I'm going to save it as a JPEG. And the reason I'm saving it as a JPEG is I want you to put the JPEG on your Google VAPD. You cannot insert a Photoshop file on your VAPD. It must be a JPEG. And a JPEG is just a very common file format that's used everywhere. So I'm going to save it as a JPEG as well. And that's the one that's going to be inserted on your Google VAPD. Okay, so I'm going to show you one more edit, and it's slightly different, but very, very similar. Okay, so as you can see, this is the history of what I did this morning. So that's my history palette, and this is all the stuff that I was doing. I can go back in history, and I can go back to open, and I can start again. Okay, and you use the history palette to also get rid of mistakes. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to show you is a slightly different filter called Pixelate. So I actually don't want to get rid of everything. I actually want to retain my levels and hue saturation. So I'm going to put those back. All right, and I'm actually going to go back to my fill because I do still want the fill layer. I'm still going to use that. So I'm not going to go entirely back in history to the beginning. I'm going to go back here. So I've got all of this. Okay. And now I'm going to add a different filter. So I'm going to go to filter, and I'm going to go to pixelate instead, which when you think of it, pixels are similar to grain. Pixels are square though, and grain is round. And I'm going to choose mezzotint. Okay. And that will give me quite obvious dots. You can also get medium dots, grainy dots. So there's all different sorts of dots. I actually like the fine dots. Okay. And then click OK. Now it's given me very, very grainy sort of pixelated surface, which I'm now going to blend into my original still life. So what did I use? I used mezzotint. Okay, so we just scroll through them, and you can see it's really, really heavy. The grain is quite obvious. Okay, I actually think out of all of these from memory, I liked the soft light. And I think I don't mind the color burn either. Actually, I'm going to go to soft light. Okay, and that kind of gives it a very sort of ethereal quality. If I went to something like color burn and it was, or multiply, and it was just not quite what I wanted, I could also change the opacity of that just to lessen the effect as well. Okay. Actually, I might just leave it at that. No, I don't like that. Go back to soft light. I think I like the soft light on full opacity. There we go. So I'll leave it at that. Okay, so there's two techniques I want you to try. I want you to try the filter gallery, and I want you to try the pixelate filters on a white layer, and then I want you to blend them or blend mode them into your original photograph. We'll save that one, file, save as, save on your computer, and I'm going to call this one edit 2, and they're both going to go into your folios. Please don't delete any of your files. Hopefully when we come back, I'll be able to print these out and either exhibit them or at least put them in your visual arts diary. So if we have our cat night, I want them actually printed. So don't delete anything. Just because you've finished making it, don't think, oh, I better clean up my computer and get rid of it, because that's what some people have done in the past, and I cannot print from your Google Slides. It will, so please don't do that. Whatever you do, don't delete your files. So save it as a JPEG as well, as edit 2. So change the name, and that's it. So yeah, I'll hopefully, you'll come up with some lovely images using those two techniques.